vision, or have another print disability which makes reading, holding a book, or turning a page difficult or impossible. The content is copyrighted by the respective publishers. For more information, please visit us on the web at nfradioreading.org. You're probably tuning in right now for Harper's Magazine. Our schedule has changed. If you were listening Thursday night at 9 p.m., that is where you would have heard Harper's. That is going to be its new home. In place of it, we'll be playing the Niagara Falls Review, moving it from its Sunday night slot into Saturday with the rest of its community paper friends. Stay with us for this reading.
Hello, this is Debbie, and for the next hour, I'll be reading from the May 19th issue of the Niagara Falls Review on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Our first article, What's the Future of the Lake Ontario Shoreline? This article is written by Kevin Werner. How will Lake Ontario's shoreline change over the next 10, 20, or even 100 years? The answers are critical for Niagara and Hamilton residents, businesses, and the thousands of users of the coastal area who are at the mercy of the significant weather events affecting Lake Ontario and its shoreline. A 4-year project launched in July of 2025 is reviewing the western Lake Ontario shoreline from the mouth of the Niagara River in Niagara-on-the-Lake to Joshua's Creek in Oakville, Mississauga, an area that includes portions of the Niagara Peninsula Conservation Authority, Hamilton Conservation Authority, and Conservation Halton Watershed. It will cover 95 kilometers of shoreline involving 10 municipalities. This study is exciting, said Brendan Bugelin, NPCA Manager of Hazard Management and Resiliency, and one of the managers for the Lake Ontario Coastal Resilience Pilot Project. We will be pushing the envelope, trying some new techniques. Officials said about 25% of Canada's population lives in the Lake Ontario watershed, and 80% of the water comes from other Great Lakes. The $2 million in funding for the project is being provided by area municipalities, the federal and provincial governments, nonprofits, and Brock University. The federal government is contributing $1.5 million through its Climate Resilient Coastal Communities program. The objectives for the study include gathering information to understand risks such as erosion, flooding, and climate impacts, mapping shoreline hazards in vulnerable areas, conducting risk and socioeconomic assessments for infrastructure and natural assets, identifying mitigation options, including nature-based solutions for high-risk areas, and establishing a coastal resilience management plan with recommendations and a roadmap for implementation. Patrick Joint, a coastal engineer with the consulting firm DHI, said the first phase of the project is to gather information on how the shoreline now looks. It is pretty varied, he said, during one of 5 open houses NPCA held earlier in May. Everybody has their own coastal community. The effort means creating an inventory of what has been done along the shoreline, including barriers, breakwalls, and other structures. The project also includes identifying what the shoreline looked like over the years and how it's changed, Joint said. I would say it has changed quite a bit. An important aspect of the project is how climate change is impacting the shoreline. That includes the lake's water levels, ice covering, waves, and wind, he said. Joint said the study will examine extreme scenarios involving climate change and possible solutions, such as what if all emissions are reduced and society goes completely green, or no emissions are cut? What is potentially the worst case scenario? What if we don't have ice on the lake? What does it mean for the property owner, he said. Environment Ontario studies have revealed that Lake Ontario's water level has risen to its highest since records have been kept for more than 100 years. It has resulted in more flooding, including in 2017 and 2018, leading to destructive storm surge damage. And with the impact of climate change, water levels will continue to fluctuate, creating uncertainty, said officials. The project can't be properly done without public input, said Brueggelin during an open house at Club LaSalle in St. Catharines. The others were staged in Grimsby, Halton, and Hamilton, held by the project team to hear what residents, businesses, and users of the coastline had to say. There are a lot of other shoreline users we want to hear from, said Bugelin, from people who walk their dogs along Lakeside Park to businesses. We want to hear from the whole community so we get the whole range of users. He said the 2017 and 2018 flooding along Lake Ontario was an important moment for its impact on the shoreline. He said if people have photos or videos of the event, they can upload the information to the NPCA website and add a marker. Joint said another round of open houses will be held in the fall, and a third round will be scheduled for 2027. The project is to be completed in early 2028. Our next article, Climate Adaptation. What could a supercharged El Nino mean for Canada? This article is written by Jordan Olmsted. A rapidly warming planet due to human-caused climate change is set to amplify what forecasters say could be a supercharged El Nino, spelling possible hot and dry conditions to come for parts of Canada. Forecasters are increasingly confident an El Nino will emerge in the coming months. El Nino spikes global temperatures and has in the past fueled catastrophic drought over Indonesia, Australia, and into southern Asia, and severe flooding in South America and the Horn of Africa. In Canada, El Nino tends to herald a warm winter. That tendency is most prominent in Western Canada, but it sometimes spills out across the rest of the country, says Bill Merrifield, a research scientist with Environment and Climate Change Canada. Drier conditions are possible too, he said, though that's more of a toss-up. The last El Nino, a strong year-long event from 2023 to 2024, contributed to Canada's warmest winter on record and thinned out the snowpack. Hydroelectricity generation tightened, and some ski resorts had dismal years. Forecasters say that this looming El Nino could be even stronger and possibly bump next year past 2024 as the hottest on record. The models are tending to say that there's some chance that it will be, in fact, the strongest El Nino in the recent historical records, Merrifield said. There's still time for the forecast to come into sharper focus, but that's being indicated as a distinct possibility. El Nino and its opposite, La Nina, are part of a natural climate cycle tied to shifting patches of warm water in the equatorial Pacific. No two El Ninos are the same, but they now all take place on a warmer planet, amplifying its impacts. A warmer ocean and atmosphere means that there's more energy and moisture to fuel heat waves and heavy rainfall. Unprecedented warming driven by the burning of fossil fuels has pushed global temperatures to about 1.4 Celsius above pre-industrial averages, placing the planet on the brink of surpassing global climate targets roughly a decade earlier than scientists had initially anticipated. While El Nino could lead to some very extreme conditions globally later this year, it's not the reason to freak out, said Frederic Otto, a climate scientist at Imperial College London who leads the World Weather Attribution Group. El Nino is a natural phenomenon. It comes and it goes. Climate change, on the contrast, gets worse and worse and worse as long as we do not stop burning fossil fuels. And it's already a much stronger influence on many extremes than most natural modes of variability, Otto told reporters in a briefing last week. Climate change is the reason to freak out, and ideally in a constructive way by doing something about it. And we do know what to do about it. We have the knowledge and technology to go very, very far away from using fossil fuels. The etymology of El Nino hints at its tendency to peak in winter, meaning little boy in Spanish, a reference to baby Jesus. The name is said to originate with South American fishermen in the 1800s, who sometimes noticed unusually warm coastal waters around Christmas time. Under normal conditions, trade winds created by the Earth's rotation and rising warm air along the equator push the warmest waters to the west, where it piles up near Indonesia. During an El Nino, those winds weaken, sometimes even reverse, and that pile of warm water rushes back towards South America. That warm water helps to steer storms towards the southern United States and away from western Canada. Come winter, British Columbia and Alberta tend to get warmer, while California and Texas get wetter. And while El Nino doesn't exert much influence over Canada's summer or fall weather, it can lead to quieter hurricane seasons in the Atlantic. The warmer that patch of water in the central equatorial Pacific, what forecasters call the Nino 3.4 region, the stronger the El Nino. When it leaps beyond 2 Celsius, it's considered a very strong El Nino, sometimes referred to as a super El Nino. The latest forecast issued by the U.S. National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration suggests an El Nino is likely to emerge in the next 3 months and continue through the winter. While it's still unclear when it would peak, the chance of a very strong El Nino emerging sometime between November, December, and January stands at about 37%. Stronger events don't always mean bigger impacts, but they can make them more likely to occur. The 2015-2016 El Nino was the last to peak as a very strong event. Temperatures in Canada soared to 4 degrees above normal that winter. It was also among the driest winters recorded in the prairies, northern BC, and Yukon. A devastating ice storm over parts of Ontario and Quebec in January of 1998 also had its roots in one of the strongest recorded El Ninos. Our next article, wait times at Niagara hospitals are up 40%, new report finds. A new report from the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives says wait times at hospitals, including Niagara's, have risen dramatically. Provincially, wait times are up 52%, said the Centre, CCPA. In failure by design, Ontario's deepening hospital funding crisis, CCPA senior researcher Andrew Longhurst found that admission wait times at Niagara Health hospitals have gone up 40% since 2020-2021, with 90% of patients in emergency departments waiting 73.8 hours, up from 52.9 hours. Provincially, 90% of patients wait 44 hours for admission in 2024-25, a 52% increase over 5 years. Longhurst said during a news conference in Niagara Falls on Monday. Niagara Health, in an emailed response this week, said when inaccurate and outdated information circulates about emergency department wait times, it has real consequences. When numbers are presented without context or don't reflect current condition, it risks discouraging people from coming to the emergency department when they need care. Niagara Health says its most recent data shows 90% of patients are assessed, treated, and when applicable, a decision to admit is made in 15.3 hours or less. For those who require admission, the total average time to move to an inpatient bed is 56.4 hours. That second phase reflects broader system pressures, particularly the availability of beds and the number of patients waiting for alternate levels of care, not delays in emergency assessment or treatment. The hospital system says its most recent data indicates it is making progress on wait times. In 2024-25, the time to decision to admit was 16.5 hours, and the time to an inpatient bed was 64.8 hours. That second phase reflects broader system pressures, particularly the availability of beds and the number of patients waiting for alternate levels of care, not delays in emergency assessment or treatment, says the emailed response from Niagara Health. That improvement reflects focused work to strengthen discharge planning, avoid unnecessary admissions by connecting patients to care in the community, and work with partners to move alternate level of care patients into more appropriate settings. This work is focused on improving patient flow so people receive care in the right place and reducing the time patients spend waiting in the emergency department, Niagara Health said in its statement. Michael Hurley, president of the Ontario Council of Hospital Unions said in a release issued after Monday's news conference that a sharp increase in wait times occurred before the latest round of hospital job cuts that commenced at the end of last year. The Ontario Council of Hospital Unions is the hospital division of the Canadian Union of Public Officials, CUPE. By any metric, our hospitals require a substantial increase in staffing and capacity to improve wait times, reduce hallway medicine, and enhance the quality of patient care, said Hurley in the release. However, the government's stubborn refusal to meet rising hospital costs is taking us backwards, whereby jobs are being eliminated every day, even as staffing shortages suffocate the system. The political choice to starve our public hospitals is a failure by design, he said. The release said the majority of Ontario's 136 hospitals have carried operational deficits since 2022, and this puts an already precarious public system at risk, said a CCPA news release. Niagara Health had a $20.16 million deficit in 2024-25, up from $2.47 million in 2022 to 2023. Over the last 3 years, our research shows that predictable increases in Ontario hospital costs are being met with consistent underfunding from the provincial government, said Longhurst. When hospital funding increases fall below the required 6%, the healthcare needs of the population go unmet. It's a preventable crisis, and it is only deepening. CCPA's analysis showed smaller and rural hospitals are the hardest hit when it comes to deficits, as hospitals with operating revenues less than $100 million had disproportionately more deficits in 2024-25. The smaller hospitals made up 61% of the hospitals in deficit, but comprised only 49% of all Ontario hospitals, its release said. The Ontario government's funding austerity and the attitudes that deride healthcare workers are harmful to the workers as well as to the patients and communities who depend on their skills and commitment, said Longhurst. This all contributes to deteriorating working conditions, rising vacancies among hospital staff, and now job cuts. He said CCPA is strongly recommending the provincial government implement an aggressive plan to address the hospital funding and capacity crisis rather than laying off staff. Hospitals need certainty in funding levels, which should increase by 6% annually. Without this, the consequences are disastrous for patients. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the Niagara Falls Review on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Our next article, Ex-Robert Land Teacher to be Sentenced for Sex Crimes, by Allison Langley. A former teacher at a controversial private military-style school in Wellandport who pleaded guilty to sex-related charges involving children will learn his fate in June. John Alstead appeared in the Ontario Court of Justice in St. Catharines on Friday for a sentencing hearing on 4 charges, including child luring and possession of child pornography. The Crown is seeking a custodial sentence of 6 to 7 years. The only conclusion you can draw is the facts of this case demand a significant penitentiary sentence, Assistant Crown Attorney Nicholas Hadjidis told the judge. Alstead, a 40-year-old West Lincoln resident, was employed as a physical education teacher at Robert Land Academy at the time of the offenses. He coached the varsity teams at the all-boys school and in 2023 received the Ontario Coaching Excellence Award by the Coaches Association of Ontario. Robert Land Academy, which closed in 2025, is currently the focus of an investigation by Peel Regional Police in allegations of child abuse. It also faces dozens of civil lawsuits alleging decades of physical and/or sexual abuse of students. I'm sorry to all my students, Alstead told the judge, Janet Bowie, Friday. Many people don't like Robert Land Academy, but it was the best time for these kids, and I will fully vouch for that 100%. All I wanted to do was help kids in life to get them to university to reach their full potential. My best way was doing that through sports. I'm very proud of what I've done and what I've accomplished in life. The criminal charges against Allstead do not relate to former students. In March 2025, the Niagara Regional Police Child Exploitation Unit and Ontario Provincial Police launched a joint investigation into the luring of minors. The Allstead began chatting online with an individual he believed was a 14-year-old girl, but was actually an undercover police officer. Through the course of their conversations, court heard Allstead requested photographs and suggested that they meet up in Niagara Falls to drink alcohol and hardcore make out. This is beyond sexualized discussion and exchanging of pictures, the Crown said. He made efforts to meet these children. Allstead also sent messages to another officer who was posing as a 15-year-old girl. Using the online name board in Niagara, he told the person he was a teacher and requested nude photos and instructed them to call him Daddy. Allstead was arrested in April 2025 as he left the private school on South Chippewa Road. A forensic search of his cell phone revealed evidence of exploitation of a 17-year-old girl and a 15-year-old boy. With the female victim, court heard, he sent her photos of his genitals and requested nude videos and photos. The mother of the boy contacted police after discovering inappropriate photos on her son's phone. Defense lawyer Jeffrey Reed said the Crown's proposed sentence is unnecessarily high and argued that a 2-year sentence followed by probation is more appropriate disposition. He said Allstead, who had no prior criminal record, is a good candidate for rehabilitation. My client is profoundly ashamed and embarrassed by what he has done, Reed said. He has become socially isolated by this. Court heard Allstead's arrest resulted in the loss of his employment and the dissolution of his marriage. The judge is expected to deliver her sentence in June. Our next article comes from the opinion page. How good grades became all about entitlement. This opinion is written by Kieran Gordon Solomon. Grade inflation is real and is coming for your children. The good news is your children will have beautiful transcripts. The bad news is those transcripts will have about as much value as a participation trophy. The worst news is this can be true even at the university level. And the worst news, inflated grades are effectively mandated from the top. To fix the problem, you have to alter the mindsets of institutional bureaucrats. That is, move the immovable objects. I'm an associate professor of philosophy at Queen's University, and I've been a full-time faculty member since 2009. The call, as they say, is coming from inside the house. Until a few years ago, essays were the medium in which humanities students prove their mettle. With the rise of AI, however, educators can no longer assume a close connection between the typewritten work a student submits and their grasp of the material or their writerly voice. Accordingly, we humanities type assign fewer essays. We use old school methods like handwritten and oral exams. We also increasingly grade students' in-class participation. We fine-tune as we go. University bureaucrats circle overhead. Not long ago, I taught an undergraduate seminar in which the grade distribution came out pretty normal. More A's than a decade ago, sure, but a healthy number of B's, C's, and D's too. Enough variance to reflect meaningful differences among students' performances. I felt as if I'd cracked a code, successfully adapted to this brave new inflationary world. One student, whom I'll call Bruce, got an A-. He felt he deserved an A, so he made his case to a high-ranking administrator who then contacted me. The administrator's concerned Bruce had received a less-than-perfect grade for attendance and participation despite having shown up to every class. How could I explain the disparity? My answer? Students were evaluated on the quality of their in-class contributions, not just attendance. Top marks went to those who distinguished themselves from week to week. In response, the administrator was unequivocal. I have been unfair. It was forbidden to grade the quality of students' participation. I must revise everyone's final mark to ensure the attendance and participation component reflects attendance only. Any student who came to every class deserves a perfect score. That was not an order, but an admonition. Because I have tenure, I felt safe declining to acquiesce. Professors everywhere are facing similar pressures, if not enforceable decrees from university authorities to grade more generously. Students care a lot about their marks, and I don't begrudge them advocating for themselves, but the administrators who run the place should help us hold the line on academic standards, not bulldoze it. Of course, with a little ingenuity, I could redesign my courses to make A's all but inevitable for every student. My work life would be easier, and enough students would be happier. I just can't do it. Grades are a tool for setting expectations. This is how high the bar is. They also act as an incentive. That aspirational A+ is achievable with a little more elbow grease. Keep going. There's another reason I won't simply give up and start distributing A's like Halloween candy. It's something Premier Doug Ford said recently about higher education. A lot of the students, you're picking basket weaving courses, and there's not too many baskets being sold out there. In other words, if it's not STEM, it won't impact skills valued by the labor market. Therefore, it's worthless. Humanitarians department, philosophy, English, history, etc., have been debunking that premise practically since they came into existence, and certainly before Ford became Premier of Ontario. Jobs require soft skills too. After all, clear and organized thinking, the ability to distill difficult concepts into plain language, the capacity to stress test one's own reasoning to ensure the chain is sound. The humanities have a great track record of incalculating these. Ford snipes notwithstanding, and I don't want to be the generation that gives up the good fight. But to fixate on the skills that we can most easily pitch to employers brushes past a deeper truth, which any professor will share if you catch one of us after a drink or two. Academic standards are part and parcel of academic disciplines. When I listen to Ford, for instance, I do so with a philosopher's ear, parsing his word slop in order to extract the premises and clock the assumptions that underlie them. A historian might hear notes of past politicians' rhetoric. In either case, we've internalized certain specialized habits of mind, honed specific cognitive muscles, tuned our reflexes, and we guide our students to do the same. It's the rough equivalent of training for a marathon or perfecting your yoga practice. When you set out to master a skill, you come to understand the values internal to it, values that are inaccessible from the outside. The challenge of incremental improvement becomes invigorating, not aversive. The payoff is the expansion of your cognitive capacities and your interior world. And yes, it will make you a more valuable employee. Fine. This is what university students are paying for, some out of their own pockets. Their professors owe them the respect of holding them to real standards. No one proudly displays a participation trophy. Our next article, still on the opinion page, is written by Matt Gurney. Ford's policies are making jail overcrowding worse. This situation is especially maddening because of how predictable it is. There's a fascinating little stat buried in some of the news reporting about Ontario's plan to significantly expand provincial jails. The system reached full capacity in 2022, and it's becoming more overcrowded every year since. By 2025, the system was operating at 127% of capacity. That's a system-wide average. In certain facilities, the overcrowding is even worse. Let's zoom in on that timeline, though. In 2022, the estimated population of Ontario was just north of 15 million. Today, it's more than 16 million. Back in 2018, when the system was under capacity, it was about 14.3 million. Starting to see a problem? I confess to oversimplifying things somewhat. The expected number of incarcerations per capita isn't static. Recent changes in Ontario to keep more people in jail, and more specifically, not out on bail, have increased demand on the system. Still, population growth is very clearly a factor. Since 2018, we've added almost 2 million additional Ontarians to the province, while jail capacity has remained generally flat. an exact figure is harder to come by than you might think, unless, of course, you've ever tried working with Ontario data sets, in which case you wouldn't be surprised at all. The net effect is a system that's massively overcrowded and causing all kinds of problems. More crowding in jails and prisons contributes directly to violence against guards and fellow inmates. It also impedes access to basic services. Ontario jails have been relying on inmate lockdowns to cope with staff shortages. Overcrowding has also contributed to prisoners being released early and to judges choosing bail over pretrial incarceration for suspects awaiting trial. And suspects awaiting trial who are innocent until proven guilty make up the overwhelming majority of inmates in Ontario jails. It is unforgivable that we should warehouse people presumed to be innocent in increasingly awful conditions. It's also oh so predictable. Readers may expect that I'll now launch into a rumination about being smart on crime, not tough on crime, or rehabilitation or broader criminal and social justice issues. Nope. My interest in this story isn't due to any particular interest I have in the correctional system, but to how the story fits into a depressingly broad pattern I've observed over the years. You're listening to a reading of articles and features from the Niagara Falls Review on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Now back to overcrowding in jails. My interest in this story isn't due to any particular interest I have in the correctional system, but to how the story fits into a depressingly broad pattern I've observed over the years. Our leaders, I use the term very loosely here, have a bad habit of being utterly shocked to discover that demand for services increases fairly predictability as the population does. Why? How are we so bad at this? It's not just jails. Child care spaces, transit infrastructure, electrical, water and sewage utilities, the entire healthcare system, such as it is, all these things are straining under the growing demands of a growing population. Certainly some blame for this should be assigned to the federal government, which has belatedly acknowledged that it ramped up the number of new arrivals to Canada too quickly. But blame should also be assigned to the leaders of Canada's other orders of government who seem consistently bewildered that a relatively static level of service delivery does not scale well with a growing population. Again, I grant that using population as a sole metric oversimplifies things. Transit demands changes with economic factors. For example, healthcare demands changes as the demographics do, and jail demand changes with policy choices. All granted, but it's worth acknowledging that our population growth is something we anticipated. Indeed, it was something most of our political leaders eagerly sought to achieve. It simply wasn't taken into account in building infrastructure, staffing it, or funding it. It's maddening, especially because of how predictable it is, which is why one of my old demands over the years has been to index everything, including service capacity and public funding levels, to population growth, inflation, or both, as appropriate. Take the political will out of as much planning as we can, because it almost always comes up short. Determine what the appropriate system capacity is, and then make scaling it up or down relatively automatic. I'd vastly prefer to live in a time and place where adjustments could be made in real time by attentive leaders with an eye for nuance and complexity. Unfortunately, I live in Toronto, Canada, in 2026. So please, someone, just automate this stuff. As much as possible, it would save us so much trouble. Our critically overcrowded jails are only the latest evidence of that. Our next article comes from the Arts and Life section. What's the deal with 6% fat milk newly on the market in Ontario? This article is written by Nicole Thompson. Astute dairy shoppers may have noticed a fresh new option in some Ontario grocery stores, with nearly twice as much fat as consumers are used to seeing in whole milk. Seal Test's new 6% fat product comes at a time when many people are rethinking long-held dietary practices, with the nutritional benefits of meat and dairy frequently debated. Followers of U.S. Health Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr.'s Make America Healthy Again agenda have rallied around full-fat milk, with President Donald Trump promising to reintroduce it into the school lunch program. Health Canada takes a different approach, recommending whole milk, which is at least 3.25% for babies under 24 months old, but otherwise suggesting lower fat options. The government agency says it stands by that after reviewing the latest evidence last year. Still, Guillaume Berube, the public relations director at Sealtest parent company ArgoPure, says there's been growing interest in higher fat options. The 6% fat product came to market in Ontario late last month, and Berube said that the company will monitor its performance and consider expanding its availability. Rise in interest. AgroPure's customers have been asked for a higher fat milk product, Berube says, noting it was of particular interest to the South Asian community. The Indian dairy company Amul has long offered a 6% milk option. The company has expanded into the North American market in recent years, and its product is available in some Canadian stores. Being an Indian person, we are the milk people. We love milk, says Anika Dalla, a Hamilton-based registered dietitian. I definitely have patients who love milk as well, just because I do work with a lot of South Asians. It's a big part of the diet. Richer milk products tend to make for tastier yogurt and ricotta cheese, she said, noting that those are the staples. It can also be used to make paneer and korma. But, she said, the MAHA movement and its popularity on social media has prompted a wave of interest in higher fat products. Is it better for you than the other milk? Not really, Dallas said. It's about preference, she said. If someone's choosing higher fat, I usually question why. If people really want that creamier taste, they can work it into their diet. But she said she'd steer them away from drinking it for health reasons. Drinking higher fat milk means potentially consuming more saturated fat, she said. Lowering your saturated fat intake can reduce your risk of high blood pressure, which in turn reduces your risk of heart disease, she said. Heart disease is extremely common, she said. It ranks as the second leading cause of death in Canada after cancer and is the leading cause of death in the United States. So why go for something that has higher saturated fat? But for kids, a higher fat milk might make more sense because their growing bodies need lots of energy. Lower fat options can also have more protein per serving than their high fat counterparts, Berube said, which is another health trend among consumers. In the past 2 years, we're seeing this strong demand for the true 3.25% milk. But on the other hand, in the dairy industry, we're talking a lot about the enriched product with protein. There is a strong demand for protein on the market. How is high-fat milk made? Milk comes out of the udder at roughly 4% fat, said Douglas Goff, a professor emeritus of food science at the University of Guelph, who is best known for teaching an annual course on ice cream technology. Once the milk reaches a processing plant, it's separated into different dairy products. The separator spins the milk at an ultra-high speed to separate the milk in two, fat-free skim milk and cream, which is roughly 40% fat. The fatty cream rises to the top of the separator, and the skim milk is left at the bottom. To make milk with a fat content between those two extremes, the machine adjusts how much cream is added back into the skim and mixes it together. By far, most people buy 2% milk, so there is an excess of cream in a dairy plant, which goes into 10% fat, or 18% fat, or 35% fat creams, or sold for butter making, Goff said in an email. Making this 6% fat milk is not much different than making 10% fat cream, except that creams have some thickeners and emulsifiers added. It's just a blend of whole milk with some additional 40% fat cream added to it. This is how high-protein milks are made, but instead of adding in more fat, the protein is isolated and added back into the milk at a higher concentration. Berube says that there's a limit to how much protein can exist in a single serving of high-fat milk, so customers may have to choose what matters most to them while they're in the dairy aisle, more fat or more protein. Moving along to the Canada and the World section, U.S. halts military board with Canada. This article is written by Kelly Geraldine Malone. The U.S. Undersecretary of Defense for Policy said Monday that the United States is pausing a long-standing military board, claiming that Canada has failed to make credible progress on its defense commitments. In a post on social media, Elbridge Colby said his department is pausing the Permanent Joint Board on Defense to reassess how this forum benefits shared North American defense. The board was established in 1940 and is an advisory forum for U.S. and Canada bilateral defense cooperation. Colby said the United States can no longer avoid the gaps between rhetoric and reality in the post, where he shared a link to a transcript of Prime Minister Mark Carney's January speech at the World Economic Forum in Davos. Carney never mentioned U.S. President Donald Trump during the widely applauded speech where he described a rupture in the world order. With geopolitical uncertainty heightened by the conflict in Iran and closure of the Strait of Hormuz, it's unclear what led Colby to announce the pause of the Defense Board with Canada. Canada spent $63.4 billion on national defense in 2025, meeting its NATO commitment to spend 2% of gross domestic product on defense for the first time. Defense Minister David McGuinty said Monday that Canada and the U.S. have a long history of robust cooperation and collaboration on continental defense. McGuinty pointed to the array of defense investments Canada has made, including Arctic radar systems and the procurement of aircraft and under-ice capable submarines. The decision to pull out of the board after Canada surpassed defense spending targets is ominous, says Van Osler-Hampson, a professor of international affairs at Carleton University in Ottawa and co-chair of the expert group on Canada and U.S. relations. Moving along, a lab has confirmed the hantavirus case in British Columbia. Laboratory testing has confirmed the presumptive positive case of the Andes strain of hantavirus reported in British Columbia. The Public Health Agency of Canada confirmed the results Sunday in a resident of the Yukon who had been on the MV Hondius cruise ship when there was an outbreak. The agency said samples were sent to its national laboratory in Winnipeg for confirmation testing after BC health officials announced the presumptive positive test on Saturday. One person's sample was confirmed positive, while their traveling partner's test was confirmed negative. There has been no further cases identified at this time. All high-risk contacts are isolating and will be continued to be monitored closely by local public health, a statement from the agency said. BC's provincial health officer announced Saturday that one of the 4 Canadians who was isolating on Vancouver Island had received a presumptive positive test. Dr. Bonnie Henry told a news conference that the person was part of a couple from the Yukon who were isolating and developed mild symptoms on Thursday, including a fever and a headache. The Public Health Agency said it has provided the information about the positive case, which is the first in a Canadian, to the World Health Organization. All confirmed cases up to date have been passengers or crew on the MV Hondius cruise ship, the statement said. Given the severity of this virus, we are taking a precautionary approach to ensure Canadians are protected. Dr. Lenora Saxinger, an infectious disease expert at the University of Alberta, said the risk from the hantavirus outbreak on the ship continues to be low for the general public, even after the confirmed case. The Canadian who was sick was on the ship when the initial outbreak happened, she said, and tested positive during the incubation period. A total of 4 people were flown to Vancouver Island after being on the ship and have been isolating when the person who was now tested positive began displaying symptoms. Moving along, 6 Canadians are among activists detained on a flotilla. 6 Canadians are among the activists detained by Israel after its military intercepted boats off the coast of Cyprus that were part of a mission aimed to break Israel's naval blockade of Gaza, Canadian flotilla organizers said Monday. The Global Sumad Flotilla said 5 of its Canadian members and 1 from the Freedom Flotilla, that is a part of the same mission, have been detained in an ongoing interception 463 kilometers from the shores of Gaza. The group identified the detained Canadians as Safa Chebi, a grassroots political organizer from Montreal, Omar Shaban, an engineer and organizer in sustainable agriculture from Toronto, Ko Ting Mung, an organizer and activist from Toronto, Sebastian Tao, a community organizer from Vancouver, Michael France, a boat technician and activist from Vancouver, and Norad Bouzid, a harm reduction worker and advocate from Toronto. In total, 12 Canadians are part of some 50 activists involved in the mission, which saw more than 50 vessels depart from the port in Marmaris, Turkey last week, the group said. Organizers with the Global Sumad Flotilla have described it as the final leg of their planned journey to Gaza's shore to draw attention to the grim conditions for Palestinians living in the war-battered territory. Shahid Mahmoud, an Ontarian who spoke to the Canadian press from one of the Global Sumad Flotilla boats, said the Canadian contingent agreed to go on hunger strike if they were detained. He said the group had lost contact with those who were detained. Chebi, one of the detained Canadians and a spokesperson for the group, said in a statement that they chose a hunger strike not to elicit sympathy for themselves, but to draw attention to the plight of Palestinians enduring confinement, arbitrary detention, and prison violence for decades and almost total silence. Our responsibility is to use every possible platform to break this silence and continue to place Palestine at the center of this struggle, Chebi said. Global Affairs Canada acknowledged a request for comment, but has not yet provided one. The Global Sumad Flotilla live stream showed activists aboard several vessels putting on life jackets and raising their hands before a boat carrying Israeli troops approached. Wearing tactical gear, they boarded the ship, and the live stream abruptly ended. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the Niagara Falls Review on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Our next article, death toll from Israeli strikes exceeds 3,000 and over 500 women and children. The death toll in the latest round of fighting between Israel and the Iranian-backed Hezbollah in Lebanon surpassed 3,000, Lebanon's health ministry said Monday. The ministry said the toll is now 3,020 killed in the Israeli strikes, including 292 women and 211 children. Fighting began on March 2nd with the Hezbollah militant group firing at Israel 2 days after the U.S. and Israel attacked Iran. Attacks from both sides have not stopped despite a fragile ceasefire. Israel has since invaded southern Lebanon and bombarded the capital Beirut and other areas, saying that it's targeting Hezbollah efforts to rearm. Hezbollah, also a powerful political entity in Lebanon, has resisted pressure, including by the Lebanese government, to disarm. More than 1 million have been displaced in Lebanon by the fighting, with some sheltering in tents along roads and the sea in Beirut. Israel, meanwhile, has struggled to halt frequent Hezbollah drone attacks targeting both their troops on Lebanese soil and in northern Israeli border towns. Israeli strikes on Lebanon have continued daily, even after groundbreaking ongoing talks between Lebanon and Israel in Washington produced a ceasefire that began on April 17th and has been extended into June. Israeli troops remain in large swaths of southern Lebanon. Hezbollah, however, is not part of the talks and has opposed them. The group instead backs its key ally, Iran, in its own talks with the United States, mediated by Pakistan. The neighbors have been officially in a state of war since Israel was created in 1948. Negotiations press on despite the fighting. Israeli military Arabic spokesperson Avake Adari called on residents in several towns near the southern coastal city of Tyre on Monday to evacuate ahead of airstrikes. Meanwhile, the militant Palestinian Islamic Jihad group said one of its officials was killed in an Israeli strike on his house at midnight alongside his daughter in the city of Baalbek, near the Syrian border. Lebanese officials have said that they seek a security agreement or armistice that would stop short of normalization, focusing on Israeli troop withdrawal from Lebanon while maintaining their commitment to disarming the Iran-backed group. Israeli officials have focused on disarming Hezbollah and described the negotiations as a precursor to a potential normalization of diplomatic relations. Despite the ongoing attacks, the two sides agreed Friday to extend the ceasefire by 45 days and announced that military delegations will take part in direct talks of their own on May 29th. Our next article, in Cuba, aid ship docks in Havana in defiance of Trump. A ship loaded with humanitarian aid from the governments of Mexico and Uruguay arrived Monday in Havana to help ease Cuba's spiraling crisis. The ship, which departed from a Mexican port, includes personal hygiene items and 1,700 tons of grains, powdered milk, and food items, according to a statement published by Cuban state media. Cuba's food industry minister, Alberto Lopez Diaz, says the items arrive at a time of great economic hardship, exasperated by the tightening of the blockade imposed on our country by the United States government. Tensions between the countries have risen, with the U.S. ratcheting up pressure as it seeks an indictment against former Cuban President Raul Castro over his alleged role in the 1996 downing of 4 planes operated by an exile group. Castro was then defense minister. Lopez Diaz said in a statement that Monday's aid would be distributed with the utmost responsibility and respect, prioritizing children, the older adults, and vulnerable families. Unlike other shipments publicized by Mexico's government as a show of solidarity towards their Caribbean ally, Mexican authorities have said very little about Monday's shipment, which arrived after weeks of heightened tensions with the U.S. government. Cuba's economic and energy crisis have deepened this year after the U.S. invaded Venezuela in early January, halting oil shipments. Then in late January, U.S. President Donald Trump threatened to impose tariffs on any country that sells or provides oil to the island. A severe gas shortage has persisted and blackouts are widespread. Several people in Havana gathered as the ship docked. "Anything that comes in is good," said one of them, 52-year-old Rino Morales. "We have to find a way to counteract the blockade, and if there are any ships left in the world, the best thing they can do is help Cuba, because it's the Cuban people who are suffering." Morales says he hasn't received any of the previous aid. "The time will come when it will be my turn. I have 2 older adult people at home, my father and my mother." Nueves Fabre, a 52-year-old teacher, also celebrated the latest arrival of aid for Cuba. She doesn't expect to receive any of it given her age, but said she's content as long as the aid goes to the people who really need it. Our last article is on the Congo. Capacity added to limit the harsh Ebola variant. Congo will open 3 treatment centers for the Ebola virus in the eastern Ituri province following an outbreak of a variant that has no approved therapeutics or vaccines, as the World Health Organization sent a team of experts and supplies to help combat the spread of the disease. "We know that the hospitals are already under stress because of patients," said Samuel Roger Kamba, the Congolese health minister, during a visit to Bunia, Ituri's capital and largest city, on Sunday. "But we are preparing to have treatment centers at all 3 sites in order to be able to expand our capabilities." The WHO on Sunday declared the Ebola disease outbreak a public health emergency of international concern. As of Monday, there were over 390 suspected cases and 105 deaths in Congo, according to Congo's health cluster, and 2 deaths in neighboring Uganda. The first person died from the virus on April 24th in Bunia, Kamba told reporters in Kinshasa on Saturday. The body was repatriated to the Mangwala Health Zone, Kamba said. It was the return of this body to the Mangwala Health Zone, a mining area with a huge population, that caused the Ebola outbreak to escalate. The director of African Center of Disease Control told reporters on Saturday that another person fell ill on April 26th, and that samples were sent to Kishawa for testing. On May 5th, the World Health Organization was alerted of about 50 deaths in Mangwalu, which prompted investigations, the African CDC director said. The first case was confirmed on May 14th. The delay was partly due to the samples of the Bunia case initially being tested for the previous strain, Zaire, Congolese officials said. The province analyzed the Zaire strain, for which they have expertise, and it came back negative, said Dr. Richard Kittinger, the health minister, innocent manager for Ebola. Although the outbreak is centered in Congo's Ituri, cases have been reported in the capital, Kinshasa, and in Goma, the largest city in the country's east. Aid groups, Médecins Sans Frontières, and the International Rescue Committee said on Monday that they have dispatched teams responding to the outbreak. Ebola is highly contagious and can be contracted via bodily fluids. The disease it causes is rare but severe and often fatal. Health authorities say that the current outbreak, first confirmed on Friday, is caused by the Bundibugyo virus, a rare variant of the Ebola disease that has no authorized vaccines or treatments. Although over 20 Ebola outbreaks have taken place in Congo in Uganda since 1976, this is only the third time that the Bundibugyo virus has been detected. You have been listening to a reading of articles and features from the May 19th issue of the Niagara Falls Review. We read from the Niagara Falls Review every Saturday at 7 p.m. Your reader has been Debbie. Thank you for listening. Have a great day.
Coming up next in the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service, we have the Wall Street Journal Off Duty at 9 o'clock. We have Sports Illustrated at 10 o'clock. We have The Athletic. Stay with us for these readings and even more. You're listening to your Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Our volunteer radio readers broadcast daily readings of newspapers, magazines, and books. For nearly 40 years, radio reading has served people who are blind or have a print disability throughout western New York and southern Ontario's Niagara Peninsula. Our broadcast signal is provided at no charge by WNED. Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service studios are located at 1199 Harlem Road. Please spread the word about your Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. For more information, call 716-821-5555. following program is intended for listeners who are blind, have low vision, or have another print